could have synthesized all the moving parts and come away saying, "This is how it happened." In order to write this book, I have tried to take a broad and balanced view of the pandemic response in government, in politics, and in culture. I studied granular reporting from inside U.S. hospitals and reports issued by the WHO. I looked at what was happening at food banks and at local public health agencies. I watched the changes over the course of the year at the White House, at federal agencies in Washington, and at the great labs in Cambridge and Palo Alto and Bethesda. I also dipped into the fact-challenged universe of Fox News and YouTube and Reddit, because on another plane, these places were also where America's response to the pandemic was being shaped. I scoured hundreds of pieces of daily journalism and relied on some terrific investigative reporting, especially by Ed Yong in The Atlantic, and the teams at the New York Times and at ProPublica, and Catherine Eban in Vanity Fair. I read a variety of books about the current state of American politics and political culture, the most significant being Jane Mayer's Dark Money, Greg Grandin's The End of the Myth, and Shoshana Zuboff's The Age of Surveillance Capitalism. Needless to say, we need both the daily reporting and the longer, more considered analysis that can only happen in books. And I questioned myself, my assumptions, my fears, and hopes. I could not have written this book had I thought I already knew most of the answers when I started. Acknowledgements. I'm grateful to the following people: Dan Simon for suggesting and editing this project, Vivian Zhang for schooling me on the science, and for being an all-around sounding board. I also want to shout out my thanks to the rest of the Seven Stories team, especially Lauren Hooker, John Gilbert, Susan Steiger, Bill Rusin, and Ruth Weiner. I also want to thank Gray Pewitt for his deep dive into internet conspiracy theories. I very much appreciate the time and thoughts of Dr. Paul Offit, Robert Langer, Dr. Bruce Y. Lee, Dr. David Relman, Martha Louise Lincoln, Jessica Malati Rivera, and Missy Pena. The work of the CDC investigative team at ProPublica and the Pandemic Health Agency reporting in the New York Times were indispensable. Also, Stephanie Sluka, Ianthi Dugan, Jamie Gordon, Matthew Grace, Jason Baruch, Jay Kelly for providing the wood stove in the writer's shack, Eric and Felix Freeland for wood chopping. Chapter 1. Smash the State. I'd actually like to go back to the old times of Tudor England. I'd put the heads on pikes, right? I'd put them at the two corners of the White House as a warning to federal bureaucrats. You either get with the program or you're gone. Steve Bannon, urging the beheading of Dr. Anthony Fauci. There are many ways to begin to tell the story of why more Americans died of COVID-19, the disease caused by SARS-CoV-2, than in any other nation on Earth. We could start at the Washington, D.C. hospital with doctors amputating the lower leg of the White House chief of security, a man who caught COVID in Donald Trump's mask-free domain. Or we could talk to the families of 46 veterans who died within days of each other in a Veterans Administration nursing home in Alabama. Or we could listen in on a therapy session with some of the New York City medics struggling with PTSD after helplessly watching some of tens of thousands of people die in a matter of weeks. Since this story involves mass death, religious zealots, and the worst case of government malpractice in the history of the United States, I'll choose the biblical opening. In the beginning, there was the state, and the ideologue said, "Let it be smashed," and so it was smashed. Atlanta, March 6. Centers for Disease Control. Early days in the shit show. Cameras are rolling. The journalists are penned off like lab monkeys, awaiting morsels of information about an increasingly confusing government response to an